Before we get started, if you missed any of our episodes, you can always head over to kfoxtv.com/community/the-breakdown. Now let's break it down. Hi guys, I'm Brad Montgomery and welcome to The Breakdown. And here we talk about finance, psychology, and science. Today we're talking about the latest as far as where we are with the real estate market. We've finally started to see a little movement. We're going to talk about that. Also, how elections and election cycles potentially can affect the real estate market. And I'm here with Adrienne Dominguez, AMAR Real Estate Group, and we're talking about kind of where we are now. But let's to do that, we need to talk about where we've been. Okay, so what happened to the market in 2020? What was the big shakeup? As if we all forgot.
Yes, I don't think anyone could forget about COVID and the staying at home mandates. When everyone, just a refresher, you probably can't forget.
Right.
When we were forced to kind of stay at home, everyone kind of realized this situation's not working for us and our family. And so we saw a big housing boom towards the latter half of 2020 after those stay-in-home mandates were put in place. And so that even led to the years after.
To see a housing boom. And really interestingly, just because my daughter's mom happened to be selling her house, okay, and she actually sold it in March, right? The end of February, early March, right before things, like weeks before things just shut down. And, hopefully that's a once in a lifetime thing. But I remember, talking with her real estate agent at the time and the housing market at the time, it was actually starting to do well. It was actually already going in a up direction as far as prices. And I remember, like, for her house, early 2020, like I said, right before everything just COVID shut down, they had like cash offers start competing with each other. And she was kind of telling me about it a little bit. So already prices, I guess, it started to trend up, and then that just shot them up.
We still had a low supply issue even before the start of COVID. Builders were constantly building, and you saw it in El Paso with the growth. I mean, areas of Horizon were getting built out even then, areas of Far East El Paso. And so luckily El Paso had places to grow in that time. But, since then we've started like kind of shrinking of where we can expand to now. And so it created even more of a supply issue in the years after 2021, 2022. Then combine that with unprecedented low interest rates.
Yes.
In the 3s and 2s. If you didn't refi, why didn't you? I did on both properties that I have. And to get an interest rate in the 2s even was popular at the end of 2021, for instance. And so we saw a lot of that.
And then things took a hard turn.
Yes.
Out of those low interest rates.
Hard turn, inflation as a result, because let's be honest, 18% of the entire economy is housing in the U.S. And so where housing goes,
I'm joking. Yeah.
The effects that the housing has on everything, where everything was, getting swept up by investor types who were, taking advantage of these low interest rates and cash offers and then refining afterwards. It was a really, great time for the investor. Not a great time for the first-time home buyer.
Yeah. And that's what was really unfortunate, because pre-2020, and I know things can cycle all the time, but there was almost like, and it's funny you mentioned that, right? The buyer versus the investor. Before that, there was always like this nice little buffer zone, this nice little cushion. The investors were like over in their area. The first-time home buyers were over in their area, and there wasn't a lot of crossover. I remember there was a home that I was looking at, and I live in now. I got it in an investment property. And I remember the guy who had, he would scoop them up and kind of like half rehab them. But it was still like technically foreclosure state. And so I had put in a bid for it, and there was another guy in it. And I think we were kind of bidding back and forth. And it was a Sunday when they decided on the bids. And I remember my realtor telling me, he goes, he's gonna choose a bid tonight, whichever he likes the best and looks the best. And then he said he's not gonna let it run into Monday. He said because if he were to let it run into Monday, like other people would, want to check it out, even though, yeah, especially I think to women and married couples, foreclosed home, with the floors need to be redone and need to be painted. That's not very appealing for a lot of people to walk into. A lot of first time home buyers, they don't see the value underneath. They see the
Well,
surface.
also their loans won't let them buy a property
that's
that's
true.
not fully,
It's fine.
live-in ready
Right,
kind of
that's
a
true.
thing.
That's
So
true.
habitable.
It's
So
not the FHA loan.
Mhm.
That's right. So that wouldn't work.
yeah.
But then, yeah, so then the pandemic came and housing became so scarce that first time home buyers were like, hey, yeah, the one that needs new flooring in the sink, can we make you an offer? And then like they were literally competing with investors much more. And then I want to say just home buyers in general, first time, your second home, or they kind of scooped up everything to where investors, it wasn't even really palatable for investors because the prices were so high you couldn't even make rent on versus mortgage.
That's
So
when the interest rates started rebounding. That's when we saw that happen with the investor types, because pricing doesn't matter if the payment is low and the rent's going to cover and everything else. But when interest rates started rebounding due to the inflation, that's when you saw a lot of investors put on the brakes.
and what year was that when?
So we saw that in 2023.
Okay.
2022 was actually the worst year for first-time home buyers in the El Paso market in the last 10 years. 20% only of the entire market space in El Paso was first-time home buyers, where they're normally around 33%. This year in 2024, we're starting to see it come back. We're at 31% of all sales this year of
So-
first-time home buyers.
And what I had noticed, and I want to ask you this too, because just for the comparison, last year I noticed things starting to like unlock and open up just a little bit as far as market movement, right? As far as homes being bought and sold. Okay. But I didn't really notice a drop in prices. It was like, it just started to, people were like, I guess this is where we are. We've been putting this off for a year plus, so we're going to move, So where are we now as far as market movement? Are we seeing even more? And are we seeing prices start to come down? Is that a driving factor yet? Or
No, yeah.
because prices are not, so to separate the two out, right? Interest rates have come down some.
But actually, they came back up this last couple of weeks.
Oh, did they read?
Yeah, so we're still in the high sixes now, and so it's hurt the buyer again in that sense. So, I will tell you this,
Yeah.
Brad, when studying the numbers, this has been the slowest months preceding a presidential election in 24 years, and that's because that's as far back as I can go into our numbers with the Greater El Paso Association of Realtors.
So usually during like an election cycle, because we want to get to that too.
Yeah.
It's like you see kind of a slight rise, like an uptick in housing sales, or
So typically it comes down in a presidential cycle.
it goes down.
It goes down prior to an election. Why? Because people are like, wait and see. The three things normally affect, right? You've got uncertainty in the market because you don't know who's going to take over. You've got the proposed housing policies of the politicians in place. That's also affects, the investor buyer and the home buyer. Who's going to give me the down payment assistance for the first time home buyer versus who's going to get our interest rates, regulated and lowered. That's the kind of the battle between those. So typically it's a wait and see. This year it's kind of come to a break, a halt. 17.5% fewer sales in this 3 months preceding this election than the 6 months preceding the election over the last 24 years. So I'll break that number down. We had more than 2,000 sales in May through August, and then it's dropped 17.5% that August through today.
That's almost 20%.
Yes,
That's
and we haven't seen
That's crazy.
that. In fact, in 2020, it rose. We saw more sales because of the interest rates coming down and all of that 2020 hustle and bustle of people being forced to stay at home. They were moving out of the bigger cities and coming into towns like ours. where things were more affordable.
That's right.
That kind of a thing. So
California plates were showing up.
California, Colorado, I could tell. I mean, Arizona, we saw a lot of that movement over here, even from East Texas over here, you know? And so that was one of the weird years in 2020. But historically, you see a drop, but it may be only 6-7% before an election. This year, 17.5%.
That is big. That's interesting. So now what typically shows up after the election? So after, I guess, people, you see that little, you'd see a bump then, I guess, statistically. Right.
Correct. So you'll see somewhat of a rebound. Some years saw, maybe a 1% still further drop, depending on who was elected and who came in and the switch over, right? The first 100 days that they talk about in the presidential election. But most of the time you'll see a rebound. And then you have your normal seasonal cycles when it comes to real estate. Summer is the most popular. That's when you see the most sales coming through. Spring is the next big season. Then it's the fall, and the winter is typically your slowest of the seasons.
So take the election aside, right? And it's hard to do because you just laid out the big impact, the larger than usual impact that it's having on the market and the decrease. But that aside, when interest rates started to go down a little, I mean, they were doing it incrementally.
Yeah.
I want to say over the last, 5 months?
So
6 months?
I want to say since the Fed dropped it in August, I want to say in the last 3 months or so.
Was there a lowering?
September.
Well, haven't there been like a couple lowerings in a row?
That was right in September, but it jumped right back up in the last month. And so that, I mean, if you talk to any lenders in town, they even told their clients, don't bother locking your rate right now.
Because it's still, even though like it's been so incremental, it's still so.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at? Okay, so then let's talk about where are we as far as interest rates for a first-time home buyer and also for investor. Where do we stand now on those?
So keep in mind, depends on your credit, depends on, everything else, right? There's your personal
That's a real disclaimer, exactly.
Disclaimer. But
you're right.
In general, you're seeing mid 6s to 6.75 for your first time home buyer, unless you're buying through a new home builder, which they're offering in crazy incentives right now, buying down rates into the 4s and 5s on new homes, making affordability a lot better, especially for the first time home buyer and the VA buyer, which is your veterans, right?
So that helps with the interest rate, not with the price necessarily.
Not with the price. We did see a 3% increase in price from last year to now. That's a normal increase. Yeah, that's the average increase year to year. But we are normalizing. And I like to tell folks, this is normalizing for when we're talking about percentages overall, but we're still, the number of sales this year is far lower than we've seen in years past.
And so sales have slowed, okay? And they're going to slow more as we go into the winter season.
We might see investor typically uptick
in the winter season
in November, December of 2024.
Not buying or?
No, because of being able to make deductions on their tax year for the tax year 2024. So that's typically, and after the election, they want to see who's winning or who won so that they can, tax plan accordingly. For instance, we saw the deductions for certain investments are starting to decrease year after year. Based on the improvements of that investment, how much you can take.
Depreciation changes on that.
So a lot of it's going to be too low to make any sense to invest in real estate by 2026 unless they renew those policies. Who's going to win is going to affect if some of those policies get reinstated.
And they need to look at some of those policies because just with the insurance prices, home insurance prices going up, it's become, and with taxes going up, I mean, there's other people taking a bite out of your cake.
Yes.
So there needs to be certainly some incentive built in. I'm sure there will be over time. So let me ask you this then, because now that we've kind of talked about interest rates and prices and kind of where the market is, this is really what I want to know. Where are prices going, right? Because every now and then it's so disheartening to look at the prices. I can't do it. It breaks my heart because everything is just, I feel like it's still so high. Okay. Is this the new norm? Is this where we're staying? I know we're not going to be here for the next 15 years, but I mean, when you saw that spike in the chart, if someone were to tell you that was going to last for 3-4 years, I mean, who would have believed it? And I mean, everything usually when you see a rebound, I mean, it's like a rubber band. But so when are we finally going to drop back by maybe 60,000 or 50,000? I know we never come back to the same. Oh, she's like, he's dreaming. He's dreaming.
I mean, sorry to break your heart here, Brad. I don't see prices coming back down. I do see stabilizing.
Right.
I see these short increments because, again, you have to keep in mind supply and demand. We still don't have enough houses for folks. There's multi-generations of people being forced to buy homes together so they could live together, whereas they would prefer to live separately, so affordability is an issue. And so they're joining forces in that sense. So fewer purchases. And then when are people going to want to let go of their 2% and 3% interest rates?
That's the other thing. Yep.
That is going to affect the supply chain for years to come. So for those of us who took advantage, we were, very blessed to do so. But those mortgages are 20, 30 years.
Yeah, they are.
So it's a lot difficult.
A lot of people
really
are gonna die with those mortgages. Yeah.
Potentially.
Pay them off. And
Potentially. The other effect is affordability due to income. Our incomes just haven't met. I did an analysis a few months ago on affordability in El Paso, and right now you have to earn $90,000 plus in El Paso to afford the average price home because of interest rates and because of taxes here.
Yeah, wages have not. That's been something that people have talked about for a while. Is that home ownership is getting harder and harder and more out of reach. I want to talk about really quickly, and that is too bad. Hopefully, if we can have some kind of first-time home buyer tax credit or something. I mean, hopefully because the best way I think to make gains in some of these areas is not to punish people, but to incentivize. So hopefully we'll come up with some incentives to kind of do that. And speaking of, this has been brought up by somebody, I think, and tell me your thoughts on this, because shortage is a huge factor in driving prices up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember during like a lot of the supply chain issues and stuff like that, a lot of home builders were like, we don't want to mess with these higher prices and stuff. The cost of all the materials had gone up. I think lumber had gone up just crazy rate by percentages. I think things have kind of settled down some, but maybe I know some of these, and this is a little bit policy, but I almost wish that somebody would take a look at it and say, okay, well, look, interest rates are high right now, right? But if a home builder wants to take out a loan to build homes, let's cut him a better deal, because it's probably good policy. You know what I mean? Like, but I don't know if it's ever looked at. It's probably good politics too, but I don't know if it's ever looked at like that. Maybe cutting certain areas, breaks that they could, be a break for them, but it would benefit a lot of people.
Absolutely, with the supply. So when it comes to that, I understand, like, there's certain policies from the presidential candidates that are floating out there, that would, one party more than the other would encourage the new home builder incentives and things like that. The other is talking more just about forcing affordability on the current homers. So it really depends on that. The only thing I'll advise, though, when it comes to home builder incentives, when they get incentivized that way, they're going to look at ways to cut costs to keep as much of those incentives as possible. So
homes may not be built as well.
And I've seen people commenting about, you might not want to consider a new home for the next 10 years based on those kind of incentives. But again, we're talking all hyperbole of what could happen based on who's going to offer what. So nothing's set in stone just yet, but that's something to look out for in the next 10 years, the next decade.
I always felt for me, as far as, and this is just personal disclaimer, I always felt like for Texas, you had the best, its pinnacle was 70s, 80s homes. You had the newer architecture coming in with the bigger windows, the arched walkways, the higher ceilings, vaulted ceilings. And you had still very, very, very good construction. Very good, like some of those brick veneer that you see around. And even the stucco was, I even know one stucco thick. I mean, they laid it on thick, so I'm not going to say where we are now, but I do think that, yeah, you do have to watch out in the broader picture that people aren't just going to try to pocket for themselves. And I think that is something I didn't think about that, but that you got to keep an eye out for. So really, so let me ask you this then, because you're in it all the time. If it takes all this to bring supply up, to really bring prices down, do you see bringing supply up as a way to bring prices down, or what is finally going to get the prices to start to trail down a little, or at least not rise so quickly, I guess?
It's going to be a combination of factors. It's going to be
and we're anything short of a crash, right? Not a crash.
Not a crash. And honestly, the 2008 crash was an artificially created crash, and so this
People
is
doing bad things.
Exactly. And so we're not seeing that this time around, which is why we haven't seen prices crash. If it had been, we would have seen prices crash by now. But I would say it's incomes need to meet inflation.
Okay.
That's going to be a slow going effort. Right.
Sure. But bringing up on that end.
So that the affordability rises. Secondly, that the supply comes up. Again, and then also people readjusting, I think, their expectation for types of housing too, because El Paso has been, single family reigning community for such a long time. Everyone wants their yard and their house.
That's right.
I think people are going to start being more open-minded to patio homes, much smaller yards, multi-families, things like that. So
yeah, not so much just the white picket fence, and so changing. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because I mean, it was amazing. I mean, we all know. I mean, pre-pandemic, it was underpriced, and everybody knew it. And I mean, it was. I remember just you go on Zillow and you could look at, some home in Horizon City, and it's a little bit farther of a drive, but there's some beautiful construction out there, and 200,000. I mean, it was crazy what you could get. It was crazy.
And back then we thought that was expensive. We're like, 200,000 in Horizon?
Right.
I don't know. It's
I
better
wanna
than
do the
farther
drive.
drive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you can't find
Anything for that.
I'll speak to my area of expertise, Santa Teresa, as well. I mean, you see a lot of people, were thinking, I'm going to leave Texas to come to New Mexico to save on the taxes, at least to make affordability better. But the pricing went even further up on the New Mexico side of things.
So that took that basically took it out.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you can't find even a beat up home for 200,000 in Santa Teresa.
Yeah,
So
believe it. Yeah, and that area is just exploding too.
Yeah.
And we're still growing. And so I guess looking forward, supply is still going to be an issue here, because we are seeing such rapid, and I mean, it's great. It's great to have growth, but hopefully we'll find ways to keep up with it as well.
Okay.
So okay, so that's where we are in the market. Price is likely going to stay pretty steady state. You're just going to have to find ways, and we're going to have to see what happens with the selection cycle, and interest rates come down a little bit, or if we get a first-time home buyer credit. I think one party was saying 25,000 or something like that. So
Correct.
We'll see what they try to do. But I guess overall, looking forward, we don't see any huge spikes coming our way, but we don't see any huge drops coming our way either.
No. And the other thing, this is completely aside, another policy that's being proposed that could impact the housing market across the nation is taxing unrealized capital gains. So what that means is, say your house value goes up, you know, 10,000, 20,000, you're going to get taxed on that increase, even if you don't sell your property, even if you just hold it. So that could actually help the supply chain if investor types are going to be like, I don't want to be paying taxes every year just because the market's going up. So that could definitely impact things too.
Okay, interesting. Well, that's something else to watch for. Well, definitely plenty to watch for. We'll have you back. Thanks for joining us again, Adrienne. By the way, where can people find you?
You can find me at Santa Teresa, 1301 Country Club Road, AMAR Real Estate Group. You can go also on our website, www.amarreg.com.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can check out our past archive of episodes on kfoxtv.com or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for breaking it down with me, and we'll see you next time here on The Breakdown.